Imagine spending billions of dollars and a decade of your life to build the perfect airplane, only to have the world's biggest aviation giant try to crush it before it ever takes off. That's the story of Bombardier's C-Series jet. But then, in a stunning twist, that very same jet ends up in the hands of their attacker's arch-nemesis. How could one of the biggest bets in aviation history lead to a company giving away its crown jewel? Why did Boeing's attempt to protect its turf end up creating its worst nightmare? Here's what really happened. What if a company, in a desperate bid for survival, created a machine so perfect it had to be destroyed? This was the reality for Canadian manufacturer Bombardier and its revolutionary C-Series jet. The C-Series wasn't just another new plane, it was a clean sheet marvel, a ground-up reinvention of the single-aisle aircraft. While its competitors were simply putting new engines on old airframes, Bombardier started from scratch. This allowed its engineers to design an aircraft optimized from its very core around the game-changing Pratt and Whitney-geared turbofan engines. The result was a machine that promised and delivered a 20% reduction in fuel burn per seat and a 15% cut in overall operating costs compared to its rivals. This wasn't a minor upgrade, it was a generational leap in technology. This innovation came from a place of necessity. For years, the market for jets seating 100 to 150 passengers had been neglected. The giants, Airbus and Boeing, served this segment with what the industry calls shrinks, shortened, inefficient versions of their larger A320 and 737 models. These planes carried the excess weight and oversized wings of their bigger siblings, a design flaw that made their operating costs painfully high. What many overlooked is that shrinking an aircraft by 20% doesn't reduce its weight by the same amount, leading to poor performance. Bombardier saw this blind spot as a golden opportunity. They engineered the C-Series with lightweight composite materials in its wings and fuselage, advanced aerodynamics, and a state-of-the-art digital fly-by-wire system typically reserved for larger, more expensive wide-body jets. The combination of these innovations made the CSeries significantly quieter, with a noise footprint 4 times smaller than its competitors, while producing 20% less CO2 and 50% less nitrogen oxide emissions. For passengers, the 5-abreast cabin offered a superior experience with wider seats, larger windows, and more spacious overhead bins. It was, by all accounts, the perfect tool for the job. But here is where the story gets really interesting. The technological leap was so significant, it forced the entire industry to react. The C-Series' promised efficiency gains panicked Airbus into fast-tracking its own re-engined A320neo program, a defensive move to protect its market share. The very existence of Bombardier's jet reshaped the strategic landscape before it ever carried a single passenger. But this technological brilliance came at a price so high it would not only threaten to bankrupt its creator, but would also paint a target on its back, inviting an attack from an industry titan that would rather see it destroyed than compete with it. While the C-Series was an engineering triumph, it was a programmatic and financial catastrophe for Bombardier. The ambition to create a world-beating aircraft from a blank sheet of paper pushed the company far beyond its operational and financial limits. The program was plagued by agonizing delays and staggering cost overruns, ultimately running 2.5 years late and at least $2.2 billion over its initial budget. By the time the jet was finally certified, the total development cost had soared past $5.4 billion, a crushing, almost unimaginable sum for a company of Bombardier's size. The financial fallout was devastating. In late 2015, Bombardier was forced to take a massive $4.1 billion write-down on the C-Series and other programs. The relentless cash drain forced mass layoffs and the cancellation of other promising projects just to stay afloat. The company's long-term debt ballooned to over $9 billion, and its credit rating was downgraded deep into junk status, making it incredibly expensive to raise new capital. By every financial metric, Bombardier was on the verge of bankruptcy, kept alive only by a lifeline of government support. However, a surprising twist revealed itself. This support, primarily from the governments of Quebec and Canada, was a double-edged sword. A critical $1 billion equity injection from Quebec and hundreds of millions in federal loans saved the program from extinction, but they also painted a target on Bombardier's back. Internationally, these funds were viewed as unfair subsidies, providing the perfect legal ammunition for any competitor willing to launch a trade war. The company was caught in a vicious cycle. Its financial weakness weakness was ruthlessly weaponized by its rivals. Airbus's legendary chief salesman, John Leahy, frequently and publicly dismissed the C-Series as a nice little plane that was destined to become an orphan when Bombardier inevitably went bankrupt. This narrative was a powerful marketing tool that created a self-fulfilling prophecy. What most people missed was how, by sowing doubt about Bombardier's future, Airbus and Boeing made it harder for the Canadian company to secure the very sales it needed to guarantee that future. It was a strategy of psychological warfare, preying on the legitimate fears of airlines making a 30-year fleet decision. The duopoly's greatest advantage wasn't their own planes, but their ability to simply outlast and undermine confidence in a financially exhausted, though technologically brilliant, challenger. Bombardier was on the ropes, needing one massive game-changing sale to prove the world wrong. And in 2016, they got it. But what they didn't know was that this moment of triumph had just sounded an alarm inside the headquarters of their most powerful rival. The lifeline came on April 28, 2016. Delta Airlines, one of the world's largest and most prestigious carriers, placed a firm order for 75 CS-100 aircraft with options for 50 more. It was a landmark validation of the aircraft's design and a powerful repudiation of the orphan narrative. For Bombardier, it was a moment of pure triumph that promised to open the floodgates for orders from other top-tier airlines. For Boeing, it was the sounding of a five-alarm fire. The deal was a calculated gamble born of desperation. The little-known fact is that to secure a cornerstone customer, Bombardier offered a massive, loss-leading discount. In its subsequent trade petition, Boeing alleged that Bombardier sold the aircraft to Delta for just $19.6 million each, a figure it claimed was 41% below the actual production cost of $33.2 million. Bombardier even acknowledged the upfront losses, recording an onerous contract provision of approximately $500 million in relation to the deal. This act of survival handed Boeing the perfect ammunition for its complaint. Boeing perceived the Delta order not as a single lost sale, but as the establishment of a strategic beachhead for a dangerous new competitor in its home market. The fear was that Delta's stamp of approval would legitimize the C-Series globally, threatening the viability of Boeing's own offering in that segment, the 737 MAX 7. Boeing's vice chairman, Ray Connor, articulated this fear in stark terms, stating, "It will only take one or two lost sales involving US customers before commercial viability of the MAX 7 becomes very doubtful." Internal projections suggested that Bombardier was aiming to capture half of the market, which would cost Boeing an estimated $330 million in revenue annually. But the real story was about to unfold. 1 year to the day after the Delta order, Boeing launched its counter-offensive. It filed a formal petition with the US government built on two legal pillars: countervailing duties to punish the Canadian subsidies and anti-dumping duties to punish the low price offered to Delta. The strategy was to use the full force of US trade law as a corporate weapon. As Boeing likely anticipated, it won a resounding, if temporary, victory. After months of investigation, the US Department of Commerce announced its findings in the fall of 2017. It calculated a staggering combined preliminary tariff of nearly 300% on every C-Series jet. The ruling was hailed as a victory for America First trade policy, but in reality, it was a death sentence for the C-Series in the world's largest aviation market. The entire case, however, hinged on a final ruling from a different government body, the US International Trade Commission, or USITC. This commission was tasked with answering a simpler, more fundamental question: was Boeing actually harmed by the Delta deal? But before the USITC could deliver its final stunning verdict, the damage from the preliminary tariff had already been done. Pushed to the absolute brink, with its back against the wall, a desperate Bombardier was forced to make a deal that would change the face of aviation forever. The 300% tariff, though temporary, plunged Bombardier into an existential crisis. The threat of such a punitive measure made selling the C-Series in the United States commercially impossible, threatening to bankrupt the entire program. The trade dispute also caused significant geopolitical damage. The Canadian government, outraged by the attack, cancelled a planned multi-billion-dollar purchase of 18 Boeing Super Hornet fighter jets. The British government, concerned for the thousands of jobs at the Belfast factory, where the C-Series wings were made, also issued public warnings to Boeing about its future defense contracts. This This immense pressure forced Bombardier back to the negotiating table with the one company that could offer a path to survival, their rival, Airbus. Talks that had failed just 2 years prior were suddenly revived under the most extreme duress imaginable. In October 2017, just weeks after the devastating tariff announcement, Airbus and Bombardier unveiled a partnership that stunned the aerospace industry. What most reports failed to capture was the sheer audacity of the terms. Airbus would acquire a 50.01% controlling stake in the CSeries program. The price for this multi-billion-dollar state-of-the-art aircraft program was a single Canadian dollar. In a truly stunning turn, Airbus contributed no cash and, crucially, assumed none of the program's massive debt. In fact, the cash-starved Bombardier was contractually obligated to continue funding the program's shortfalls for the next year, committing to cover up to $350 million in 2019. In effect, a company on the verge of bankruptcy was paying to be relieved of its own crown jewel. A cornerstone of the deal was a brilliant strategic maneuver to neutralize the tariffs. Airbus announced it would build a second CSeries assembly line at its factory in Mobile, Alabama. Since jets built in the US are not subject to import duties, this Alabama gambit would allow them to deliver planes to Delta tariff-free. It was a checkmate move that signaled to the market that the CSeries would survive. Then came the final bitter irony for Boeing. In January 2018, the US ITC delivered its unanimous 4-0 final ruling. It threw out the tariffs completely. The Commission's public report laid bare the fatal flaw in Boeing's argument. It concluded that Boeing had not actually lost the Delta sale because it had not truly competed for it. Evidence from Delta confirmed that Boeing's offer consisted of a mix of used out-of-production Boeing 717s and used jets from its Brazilian partner, Embraer, not its new 737 MAX 7. The Commission found that the MAX 7 was a substantially larger and heavier aircraft that served a different market segment. The simple, irrefutable logic was that if Boeing did not lose a sale, it could not claim to have been injured by that sale. Boeing's entire legal war, the very attack that forced Bombardier into the arms of Airbus, was built on a lie. With a new parent, a new name, and the full backing of an aerospace titan, the jet wasn't just saved, it was reborn as the Airbus A220. But how did this change the market, and what was the ultimate price for Boeing's mistake? Under the Airbus umbrella, the A220's commercial fortunes experienced a dramatic and immediate reversal. The Airbus brand name provided the market confidence and long-term security that Bombardier could never offer, unlocking a wave of latent demand. The sales data tells a stark tale of two eras. In the decade it controlled the program, Bombardier secured approximately 402 firm orders. Since the Airbus takeover, the program's total net orders have surged to 941, with a backlog of nearly 500 aircraft. Major blue-chip airlines that had been hesitant to commit to Bombardier quickly signed deals with Airbus. JetBlue placed a large order for 100 aircraft to replace its older fleet. Air France ordered 60 to modernize its short-haul operations, and Qantas selected the A220 for its regional renewal. Delta Airlines, the carrier at the center of the original dispute, repeatedly reaffirmed its confidence in the aircraft, expanding its total commitment to 145 jets, making it the A220's largest customer. To meet this surging demand, Airbus is now ramping up production with an ambitious target of producing 14 aircraft per month by 2026. But the hidden story is what this meant for Boeing. For Boeing, the outcome was a strategic catastrophe of its own making. Its aggressive legal strategy had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. It failed to eliminate the CSeries and instead transformed it into a far more formidable competitor, now backed by its primary rival. This left Boeing with a glaring hole in its product lineup, facing a superior aircraft in a market segment where it had no modern offering. Boeing's reactive counter-strategy was to pursue a $4.2 billion partnership with Brazilian manufacturer Embraer, whose E-Jet E2 family is the A220's main competitor. But this venture also collapsed. In April 2020, Boeing unilaterally terminated the agreement. Embraer publicly accused accused Boeing of manufacturing false claims to escape the deal because of its own deteriorating financial and reputational state. The timing was critical. Boeing was reeling from the massive financial fallout of the two fatal 737 MAX crashes and the subsequent global grounding of its best-selling jet. A crisis that absorbed all of its financial resources and management attention. The corporate culture that prioritized a legal war against the CSeries over genuine product innovation ultimately left the company too weakened to execute its own strategic response. The failed deal, for which Boeing eventually paid Embraer a $150 million settlement, left it completely checkmated. Today, the A220 gives Airbus enormous leverage. The looming threat for Boeing is the potential launch of a stretched A220-500. Such an aircraft would be a clean-sheet competitor aimed directly at the heart of the single-aisle market, challenging Boeing's 737 MAX 8. While Airbus remains publicly hesitant, the strategic option to do so hangs over Boeing for years to come. Click here to see another one of our videos.